It was all about the election. The ex-White House aide, Olivia Troye, Troye, I believe it's pronounced Troy or Troye, on Trump's narcissistic mishandling of COVID-19. The first staffer on the coronavirus task force to go public tells the New Yorker that America's pandemic response was derailed by the person at the very top. Okay, I think we all know who the person at the very top is. Written by Susan Glasser, September 18th, which is today, Friday. There's a picture of her here. So it was shocking to see the president saying that the virus was a hoax, saying that everything was okay when it was not. Olivia Troye says in a video released Thursday. Alright. On this side here, there's audio. I'm not going to play it. When I spoke with Olivia Troye on Thursday afternoon, she sounded more than a little scared. She was about to go public with a scorching video in which she would denounce President Donald Trump and his stewardship of the country during the coronavirus pandemic. Troye, who served as Vice President Mike Pence's advisor for Homeland Security until late July, has witnessed the administration's response to the crisis as Pence's top aide on the White House coronavirus task force. She had seen Trump rant in private about Fox News coverage as his public health advisors desperately tried to get him to focus on a disease that has now killed some 200,000 Americans. She had decided that Trump was lying to the American public about the disease and that words matter, especially when you are the President of the United States, and that it was time to speak out. She was nervous and scared and worried for her family and her career, but she plunged ahead anyway. I asked about her first-hand observation of the president during the crisis. She said that Trump was disruptive, that he could not focus, that he was consumed by himself and his prospects in November. For him, it was all about the election. Troye told me. He just can't seem to care about anyone else besides himself. Troye joined the coronavirus task force when it was first established in late January, before any Americans had died from COVID-19. Her experience in it, Troye told me, convinced her that Trump's handling of the situation, the coronavirus spreading of disinformation, the conscious spreading of disinformation, the disregard for the task force work had made the crisis far worse for Americans. She warned about the president's push for a vaccine before the November election and said that she did not trust him to do the right thing for the country's health and safety. What I'm really concerned about is if they rush this vaccine and pressure people and get something out because they want to save the election, she said. Troye is the first White House staff member who has worked on the coronavirus response to speak out publicly against Trump. But the president and the administration she described were drearily consistent with portraits that have emerged in countless other tell-all interviews and books. A White House riven by backstabbing and suspicion, where trouble flowed from the top and good governance was subordinate to presidential whim and partisan calculation. She told me she believed that most other staffers on the coronavirus task force were genuinely motivated to help Americans weather the pandemic, but that Trump blocked them from implementing the right policies. Everything that you're putting in place is derailed, not just by a random person. It's derailed by a number one. It's derailed by the person at the very top, she said. Troy described herself to me as a lifelong Republican whose first job out of college was at the Republican National Committee. On 9/11, she fled her office on foot, walking home past the smoldering fire of the Pentagon, a moment that convinced her, like many others in her generation, to pursue a career in national security. She went on to serve as a George W. Bush administration appointee in the Pentagon. For the first year and a half of the Trump administration, she worked at the Department of Homeland Security as a career intelligence official before being detailed to Pence's staff. Civil servants like herself were reviled as deep staters by Trump's political appointees, she said. They were viewed with even more suspicion after Trump's impeachment in the House. In December, was aided by testimony from mid-level White House staffers including Jennifer Williams, Pence's national security aide, who worked in the office next to Troy. I actually find that term very offensive, she told me, because not once while I was there did I do anything that I believe would lead anyone to think that I am a deep state stater, constantly undermining his agenda. At the end of the day, I am a career officer, and my job was to serve, no matter who was in office. Soon after our conversation, a coalition called Republican Voters Against Trump released Troy's video, the third such testimonial of a former administration official speaking out against the president that the group has produced in recent weeks. Let's see what's video here. Spam. 444. At the end of the day, I'm a career officer and my job was to serve no matter who was in office. Soon after our conversation, right, there's the video. As pictures of her sitting alongside Vice President Pence flash on screen, she says that by mid-February, the task force knew that the coronavirus was a lethal threat to the U.S. But the president didn't want to hear that because his bigger concern was that we were in an election. Yeah, Troy said. It was shocking to see the president saying that the virus was a hoax, saying that everything was okay when it was not, despite that he had been very clearly told in private. Troy ends the video by calling herself a John McCain Republican and endorsing Trump's opponent, Joe Biden. In the video, and there's the video here, I guess, right there. In the video, let's see, Troy recounts when Trump, a noted germaphobe, met with the coronavirus task force early on in the crisis and told its members that perhaps the pandemic was a good thing because he would no longer have to shake hands with all the disgusting people at his rallies and other public events. Now, let me just stop there because I've always been suspicious of Trump and how he became so endearing to these people, these regular folks, and I don't know, maybe middle America or in the boondocks of America. I was suspicious because there's somebody from, you know, Fifth Avenue or Park Avenue, as they would say. The elite in Manhattan has absolutely nothing in common with the average person who goes to his rally, the average person who looks like somebody who likes to see wrestling or, one of those stuff on TV, one of those fake shows, and so forth. He has nothing in common with them. He didn't grow up with anybody like them. Nothing whatsoever. When he was a boy, nothing. He had no such friends. No, nothing. Nobody from those type of groups of people he would associate with. But yet, as an older person, for some reason, he attracts this crowd of people. So now it's out there. Trump's call. Trump says that it's a good thing that the pandemic came, so he doesn't have to shake the hands of all the disgusting people. That's the disgusting people wearing red hats, the MAGA hats that say "Make America Great Again" or Trump 2020 or "I Love Trump," "Woman for Trump," Hispanics for Trump, Blacks for Trump, you name it. Trump refers to all these people as disgusting. I have to laugh. As disgusting, and that he's happy because of the pandemic. That's an excuse not to shake their hand, because normally, if it were not for the pandemic, he would be forced to go out there and meet these people. So now he can stay way back from them and speak. Isn't that something? His own die-hard supporters, he calls them disgusting. During our interview, I asked Troy if she could remember other particularly memorable times when Trump spoke privately to the group. She recalled how Trump refused several times to consider urgent business that the task force presented to him, deciding to talk about himself. That's a narcissist. Yeah, you a pandemic is coming. A pandemic is coming, and they have urgent stuff they want to talk about, and he wants to talk about himself. He wants to talk about himself and a preferred news network and how upset he was with them instead of focusing on the agenda at hand. Fox News coverage, in other words, preoccupied the president more than saving American lives. I asked Troy if that shocked her. No, she said. She remembered what she thought at the time. This is exactly what you would expect. Sadly, the surprise here is not that Trump acted so callously in the midst of the pandemic, but that so many senior government officials know that this is happening and are doing nothing to stop it. Troy's testimony, like that of so many others, is from inside the room. In this case, from inside the very room that is supposed to be dealing with the single biggest crisis currently afflicting the United States. Every president has its dissenters, people who leave and tell tales after they do. But there has never been anything like the stories that have emerged from the Trump White House, from so many who worked with the president and observed him up close. People like his former National Security Advisor John Bolton, Bolton, who called Trump unfit for office, and people like the former Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis, the former White House Chief of Staff John Kelly, and the former Director of National Intelligence Dan Coats, all of whom have relayed grave concerns about Trump that have made their way to Bob Woodward and other journalists. In the end, this is what struck me most during my conversation with Troy. She's young, only 43 years old, with a long career ahead of her, and she was willing to put it all on the line publicly, whereas people like Mattis and Kelly were not. That contrast could not have been more stark as I read It quotes up Ed in the Times that published the same day as Troy's video. Quotes clearly referring to Trump's recent undermining of faith in the upcoming election, said that a national commission should be established by Congress to ensure confidence in this fall voting. Quotes never once referenced Trump by name, and he has never publicly come forward to share with Americans his misgivings about the president. Why not? He's a veteran U.S. senator and a former U.S. ambassador who closed out his career as the head of the massive U.S. intelligence bureaucracy. What does he have to risk? Okay? What does he have to risk? Troy, with much more to lose, and with none of the stature of a former member of Congress or a former Marine general, had much more courage than all of them. She went ahead when they have not, knowing that she would be attacked. And sure enough, when the video went online, the White House released a comment about her that was harsh and personal. High direct supervisor in Pence's office, Lieutenant General Keith Keller, told the Washington Post, right? Let's see, that Troy was a disgruntled former detailee from the Department of Homeland Security who was no longer capable of keeping up with her day-to-day duties. Yeah, sure. Later, when Pence himself was asked about Troy, he told reporters that she was just one more disgruntled employee who's left the White House and decided to play politics during an election year. When I spoke with Troy once more on Thursday evening, she was bracing for more such comments from powerful men. I asked her if she was bothered by the failure of senior officials who share her views to speak out, as she had done. Troy was generous. I know that I'm not alone and know how hard it is, she said, but she added, and this is a point that cannot be repeated enough between now and November 3rd, and this is not a time for silence. I hope that this will encourage other voices who were obviously much more senior than I was to tell the truth about the situation here we're in, she said, and how dangerous this is. Well, I think what it comes down to those men, the former generals or what have you, it comes down to money and playing the role and being part of the party and so forth. Yeah, some of them may come and say, yeah, he's unfit for office and that's it. But they didn't elaborate to speak of the things he did, the crimes he committed. So they just left it at that. And you have to wonder what else they know. And they not, but this woman is braver than them, even though, you know, one was military and generals and all that stuff. But she has more of the heart of a lion than they do because she was able to step forward. They, at the end of their career, they made their money, but still, they probably want to make more money. So even though they know what Trump is doing is wrong for the country, they really don't care. You know, writing an op-ed about a commission, that's all a bunch of BS. You don't need a commission because America has had elections through what? Wars. Even during the Civil War, when Abraham Lincoln, was president. And he couldn't even go vote for himself because you would have to go back to Illinois to vote in person, and he couldn't do it. You know? And there, we had so many different wars: World War One, World War Two, stuff like that. And we have never had this kind of problem where people suspecting there's going to be fraud in the election, fraud in the election. No, only since Donald Trump has become president, then if you from another country, You wonder if America is like a third world country with fraud in this election, fraud in. You never used to hear about that before. We accept that we have 50 states and we have different counties in each states that run the election, and we have monitors. We have a Republican, we have a Democrat who sit there in each polling station to observe. Yeah, that's what happened. But yet you keep hearing every day there's going to be fraud in the election, fraud in the election. You never heard this from Obama. You never heard this from George W. Bush. You never heard this from Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, the father. Even though he lost the election, he never talked about fraud. And the polls show that George W. Bush was losing. But he never said, oh, you know what, there's going to be fraud, and the only way they can win is if they commit fraud. No. George W. Bush lost against Clinton, who was a governor of Arkansas. Nobody even heard of Clinton, Bill Clinton. And he stepped down. He did the decent thing. He didn't say, oh, there's going to be fraud in the election if Bill Clinton wins. Yeah? And you go back in time to prior president, you didn't hear all this nonsense about fraud. This is the only president of the United States that keep talking about fraud because he knows the polls show him losing. What a sad time we live in, don't we?